Hello, welcome to Chapter 16 on the Midnight Ferry. Today we're looking at ship-to-shore, wireless radio on shore, across continents. This has got a little bit of an Australian bent, but it's also a general history. The telegraph in the 19th century transformed the way that humans communicate, allowing almost instantaneous communication from town to town, city to city, and across continents. The telegraph brought a great revolution in communication, but it was fixed to certain points. It was reliant on electric generators, and it was reliant, of course, on copper wires. So for ships at sea, there was still no communication apart from that which had traditionally been used, such as lamplights and flags and so on. And when a ship was in distress, it needed help quickly, as we can see from Storm at Sea off the Norwegian coast, pictured here, 1837 by Andreas Achenbach. For the ships, there was still no major form of communication. The invention of wireless technology would transform communications at sea and across the globe. Here we see an important invention, the Marconi coherer, which was invented, of course, by Giuliano Marconi, who we will be hearing a lot more about. Probably the best way to introduce the importance of wireless telegraphy was to talk about the distress call sent by the Titanic in 1912 to the ship Carpathia at a time when wireless was in its infancy, which just demonstrated the importance of being able to communicate at sea. So this is a short clip from A Night to Remember, the film about the Titanic from the 1950s, where the Carpathia first receives the distress signal from the Titanic. Inventors were beginning to think that if a way could be found to send electrical impulse without a connecting wire, it could revolutionise communications. In 1887, German physicist Heinrich Hertz demonstrated the reality of James Maxwell's theory of electromagnetic waves by generating waves lower in frequency than light, showing that they exhibited the same wave properties as light. So it really opened the way to the concept or the possibility of wireless telegraphy becoming a reality. Let's move on to Marconi, the Italian Marconi, the inventor. He grew up in Italy, and he learned chemistry and mathematics and physics at home and through a series of private tutors hired by his well-to-do parents. And he had a very strong interest in electromagnetism and wireless telegraphy from a young age. Mentor was Vincenzo Rosa, a high school physics teacher in Livorno. Rosa taught the 17-year-old Marconi the basics of physical phenomena as well as the theories of electricity. So Marconi was born in 1874, I should add. And he, from about the age of 11, he was interested in this field. And in the 1890s, he began working on the idea of wireless telegraphy, the transmission of messages, of telegraph messages, without connecting wires as used by the traditional electric telegraph. He began experimenting from about the age of 20 on radio waves and building much of his own equipment in the attic of his home at the Villa Grifoni in Pontecchio, which, supported by his father, Marconi continued to read through the literature and picked up on ideas of physicists who were experimenting with radio waves. He developed devices such as portable transmitters and receiver systems that could work over long distance, turning what was essentially a laboratory experiment into a useful communication system. he came up with a functional system with many components. A relatively simple oscillator or spark-producing radio transmitter, a wire or metal sheet capacitor area suspended at a height above the ground, a coherer receiver. So he was basically coming up with the tools that were needed to make wireless work. On the 13th of May 1897, he sent his first ever wireless communication over the open sea, a message transmitted over the Bristol Channel from Flatholm Island to Lovelock Point near Cardiff, a distance of 3 miles. The message read, "Are you ready?" Wireless telegraphy began to be used on ships and led to a number of distress calls being received and acted upon before the Titanic, which is the most famous early case involving the use of wireless to help respond to a shipwreck or a sinking ship. Titanic was the largest ship afloat upon entering service and the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners built for the White Star Line. The ship, which was going quite fast, trying to make a record maiden voyage between England and New York when she struck an iceberg. So of course it was a disaster which made headlines around the world, and because of the Carpathia being there that others were able to reach safety. Although it was very calm, it was incredibly cold, and once you were in the water you didn't survive. Some key statistics: there were 712 survivors of the 2,224 on board, which was a 32% survival rate. There were 20 lifeboats, the total number which were carried. There were 465 empty seats on the lifeboats due to underfilled launches. The temperature in the water was -2 degrees. On the night that the Titanic went down, Radio Officer Jack Phillips was working to send messages to Cape Race at Newfoundland, trying to clear a backlog of passengers' personal messages that had accumulated when the wireless had broken down the day before. Bride was asleep in the adjoining cabin, intending to relieve Phillips at midnight. Shortly after 9:30, Phillips received an ice warning from the steamship Mesaba, reporting drifting ice directly in the path of the Titanic. Phillips acknowledged Mesaba's warning and continued to transmit messages to Cape Race. The wireless operator on Mesaba waited for Phillips to report that he had given the report to the bridge, but Phillips continued to send messages. One of the only surviving officers sort of blamed Phillips for this and said that the delay was fatal and the main cause of the loss, but a lot of people disagree with this because Phillips had provided some earlier messages about conditions in the day, and as we will see, Phillips ended up being a hero because he stayed at his post basically until the ship had almost gone under and was not seen again. Just should mention the important person in the whole thing also is Nikola Tesla. 1856 to 1943 was a Serbian-American inventor who discovered and patented the rotating magnetic field, the basis of the most alternating current machinery. So he invented the foundational technology for wireless transmission, demonstrating radio communication in the 1890s and holding patents for his system. However, Guglielmo Marconi is widely credited with inventing the first workable or practical system because he received the first patent in 1896. So there was a sort of court battle over this at some stage in the United States. So like stepping stones along the way, and these two got there, both very clever men, but anyway, we'll move on. So after the Titanic sunk, there were a number of new regulations, including a 24-hour radio watch, a secondary power supply, and the licensing of radio operators. I just wanted to talk a bit about an early adopter of new technology, which was Sir Douglas Mawson on his Australian Antarctic Expedition of 1911 to 1913. Douglas Mawson's Australasian Antarctic Expedition of 1911 to 1914 was the first to establish a radio link to Antarctica. Radio was still a new technology, The stations used the German-made Telefunken 1.5 kilowatt spark transmitter. The wireless equipment was operated using long wave and Morse code telegraphy. The expedition established its base at Cape Denison. So basically the wireless worked between Hobart, the southernmost capital in Australia, and Tasmania, and then Macquarie Island, which is a sub-Antarctic island, basically roughly halfway between Tasmania, Hobart, and Cape Denison in the Antarctic. So here you can see a bit of a diagram showing the linkages. Sorry. This is the station on Macquarie Island. In March 1912, Mawson and his party arrived in Commonwealth Bay, 2,670 kilometres south of Hobart. The 18 men spent the autumn and winter building the main base at Cape Denison and conducting research and preparing for land expeditions in the summer. So in the first year, the radio signal was not great. It was intermittent at best. At one stage, the tower was blown over by a blizzard and had to be reconstructed. Disaster struck in the summer when they began their sledging expeditions, and Mawson lost his two companions out in the wilderness. One fell down a crevasse and the other one died from a sort of fever brought on by, they believe, eating the livers of the dogs that they were forced to kill. So Mawson just made it back to base, but they had to spend a second winter there, and that's a whole story you'll see, for example, in Mawson's classic, The Home of the Blizzard. But in the second winter, they had a new radio officer, and his name was Jeffries, and on February the 15th, he surprised us with the exciting intelligence that he had heard Macquarie Island send a coded weather report to Hobart. And so in a few days, they were actually able to get the transmitter to work, and they were able to send and receive messages. This is a short video about a station that was established at Macquarie Island.
The wireless system was primitive by today's standards, but it was effective, and the Macquarie Island system was operating by early 1912. On February 13, it picked up signals from a ship, and the following day from Sydney and several more ships. On March 12, 1912, the Macquarie Island station heard signals from a ship near Fiji, some 4,000 kilometres away. And by May 12, it began sending daily weather reports to the Meteorological Office in Wellington, New Zealand. These daily reports continue to this day. But it wasn't until September 25, 1912, that the first signals were heard from the main base, which had been established at Cape Denison. It was faint, and all that was heard was, "Contact Pennant Hills in Sydney." It took another 4 months to make further contact with Mawson's main party. On February 3, 1913, the base reported that Xavier Mertz and Belgrave Ninnis had died. Then 17 days later, the two bases finally made two-way contact. And that remained until Mawson's party left Cape Denison for home in December 1913. Only 3 small pieces of the mast remain.
Today, of course, Australians are better off when they're working in the Antarctic in terms of communications. They have a satellite data connection, and whilst priority is given to scientific data, there is plenty of space for personal use as well. Please subscribe for more videos.